Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof, the 2nd of May 2024. This is a military aid, military equipment video, giving you the news of what's been going on with regard to military aid to Ukraine and concerning the war. This is Jakub Janowski of Oryx, who now I think works with War Spotting, as Oryx is kind of still going, and in fact he's updated Oryx with a list of heavy equipment here. Nonetheless, we're just going to look at some of the recent news for what has been given and pledged to the to Ukraine to give us a bit of a synopsis. So, delivered an L-39 light attack or training aircraft from, that looks like Lithuania, two Mi-17-1E transport helicopters from, that looks like Argentina. Estonia and Denmark are given 2 patrol boats. 18 further 155mm AS-90 self-propelled guns from the UK, 1 Skynex air defense system from Germany, 10 Marder 1A3s, 1 Brückenlegerpanzer Biber bridge layer, 18 Oshkosh tank transporters, 1 DAX armoured engineering vehicle, and an air surveillance radar from Germany. So all of that's been delivered. Pledged is Germany has pledged another Patriot battery, the US 14 M2 Bradleys, 234 unknown mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, 1,000 Humvees. Of course, Humvees are being sort of phased out, and there's, goodness me, there's literally hundreds of thousands of Humvees in the US. So, 50 light tactical vehicles, 7 155mm M777 howitzers, 8, and that's all from the US. From the UK, pledged 8 155mm M109A4BE, those are howitzers, 36 L119 105mm towed howitzers, 160 Husky infantry mobility vehicles, 162 armoured vehicles, likely FV100 or FV430 series, as I said the other day, 78 all-terrain vehicles, likely the Warthog tracked carriers. So that's all from the UK. 11 LAV. Those are big APCs from Canada, 5 Oshkosh M1070 tank transporters from Germany, and from the UK, 60 assorted small boats. So quite a lot of kit is due to go to Ukraine of a fairly significant size. Also some old Czech deliveries that he missed earlier. He says 12 T-72Ms from Czechia, 25 unknown infantry fighting vehicles, almost certainly BMPs. And then you've of course got other ones that have been sort of pledged and delivered. The ones from Bulgaria, they should be getting imminently 100 old BTR 60s that have been upgraded, so on and so forth. So there is significant equipment going to Ukraine. Here we have Ukraine receiving the 2nd Skynex air defense system from Germany, according to Kyiv Independent. The highly accurate system can be configured in a variety of ways depending on the threat, and it's far cheaper than a Patriot missile system. That reminds me, yesterday I talked about that, I forget where it was from in the end. I'm going to have a look. There was a Mantis system that was promised. I was trying to work out whether the Mantis was the Skynex or not. So this is it. So Latvia had approved a military package for Ukraine, which is set to include Rheinmetall's Mantis. Now, German aid to Ukraine said, by the way, the Mantis thing, I think is very likely fake news. Would be news to me that someone else besides Germany operated Mantis, and Germany donated their 2 systems to Slovakia for the S-300 Slovakia donated. I might be wrong. I don't know everything, but it wouldn't really surprise me. So that's interesting. I don't know what's going on with that system there. Nonetheless, the Skynex from Germany is apparently, a second one is there in Ukraine, so it's really good news. We have Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, the US, saying that the US will provide Ukraine with as many ATACMS missiles as possible, the Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin has said, and that's coming from the Ukrainian news source new voice of Ukraine. So good news if that's the case. Like, they need as many ATACMS as they can get their hands on, the Ukrainians. Now, interesting that this news came out yesterday. Some of Ukraine's allies have sent weapons to Kyiv with no restrictions on strikes inside Russia, according to Latvian Foreign Minister Balba Braza in an interview with European Pravda. Now, we know Finland has said this, I think, quite formally. We're up for you using weapons inside Russian territory, but it's just, what has Finland given? As in, I don't mean that sounds a bit wrong. I mean, Finland gives a lot of stuff to Ukraine, but they never say exactly what they give. So they give you the top line monetary value for the equipment, but you just don't know exactly what the stuff is. It might be that they have been provided, for example, drones that can go at a greater distance from other countries, and Ukraine is using Western equipment to strike into Russia. I mean, we just don't know, right? Pure speculation. Right, this is a quote from DG Armament, which is Délégué Général pour l'Armement, Compte Officiel de Manière Shiva. So it's a general delegation for arms. I don't know if that's a French Quango or NGO or French department. Anyway, we must first accelerate the development of a number of materials that will naturally become competitive. I'm thinking, for example, of the SAMP-T NG air defense system, which the Minister of Armed Forces wants to speed up. The successor to the Mamba will represent a technological breakthrough compared to the American Patriot. It will be one of the only systems in the world capable of intercepting a hypervelocity missile. Now, I thought this is quite an interesting little statement, because what you're going to get, no doubt, with this war raging and commercial arms entities looking on, thinking, well, there are needs here. How do we fulfill those needs? Yes, there's that economic incentive, the financial incentive, so that they can make profit and et cetera, et cetera. But the point here is that there are particular needs on the battlefield that need to be filled, and each company is going to be vying to be the one to do that. And at the moment, Patriot are getting so much advertising that I'm sure that they will get big orders out from this. Now, if the manufacturers of the SAMP-T are just about to produce their new upgraded version of the SAMP-T that is supposedly able to take down hypersonic missiles, that ballistic missiles, then actually this is a great opportunity for them for some marketing here and for getting their updated missile system to the market ahead of any further advancement of the Patriot system. So, it's like this with different arms manufacturers, but this is the free market reacting to a war and hopefully innovating and coming up with the goods to help Ukraine. I mean, it's not just about profiteering or anything like that. It is not about profiteering. It's about making a profit. Yes, that's necessarily part of the free market, but it's also having the demand for what you can supply and being able to meet the needs, of very particular niche needs of the Ukrainians, for example, and indeed the rest of the world going forward, who are looking on at this war, say, "Oh, right, this is what we're going to need going forward." And you'll have, in this case, you'll have, Raytheon up against the manufacturers SAMP-T for what they can provide. Right. Estonian MP, Member of Parliament, Kristo Ennevaga, has decided to cover a distance of 1,000 kilometers by bicycle to raise money for drones and cars for Ukrainian defenders. Thank you to him. Ukraine has some incredible friends. Like I always say, how many people are doing this for Russia in other countries? And what does that say about what Russia is doing and what the moral value of what they're doing really is? If you've got people going out their way to cycle 1,700 kilometers in order to raise money to help Ukraine, then it says that I think Ukraine are the victims here. They're doing the right thing. Russia are the aggressors, and they're very much doing the wrong thing. Anyway, the war is just a bike ride away. To illustrate that, I'm riding my bike from Tallinn to Kyiv. We must not forget that a full-scale war is ongoing in our neighbourhood. Mr. Varga set off from Tallinn on April the 26th. In 4 days, he covered 1,000 kilometers, almost reached the border with Ukraine, and has already managed to raise around 27,000 euros. That's absolutely brilliant. Well done to him. And in the wake of the deadly strikes works on Chernihiv, the French state and companies and local authorities have pledged more than 30 million euros in aid. French ambassador to Ukraine has also announced aid for the Polytechnic University, a hospital, and the energy sector in that particular area. So it seems that there are certain areas. I think France might be involved more in Chernihiv in the way that Denmark is involved in Mykolaiv. This is interesting that the France Diplomatie, so the Minister for Europe, EU and Foreign Affairs, the ministry, is supporting Halo Ukraine. Now, Halo is a demining charity that does amazing work all around the world, but is working in Ukraine particularly. They often have their guy on Ukraine, the latest podcast, the Daily Telegraph podcast, which is fantastic, and talking about the work they do. And this is one of the rare occasions where Halo might be the first occasion that they've actually done their demining work while a war is going on in the country in which that war is taking place. So normally they go to places like Cambodia, decades after wars have taken place and finished, and they continue that demining activities in those former war zones. Well, this is a case of doing the demining in a war zone or in a country while a war is still taking place. Maybe not right on the front line, but in places where the front line has receded. Okay, I thought this was a pretty good idea. I've long talked about how Ukraine, particularly with the issues they have with mobilization and the lack of boots on the ground, they need to think creatively about this. You need to think about all the jobs that people can do where they don't need to be young and fit particularly. So when you have, I've talked previously about the mobile anti-aircraft groups going around in SUVs with like a big gun mounted on the back or whatever, or maybe even like Gepards to some degree. They're not involved in fighting on the front line usually, so they're going to be further back or protecting other bits further back. You can have older people operating these. Despite not being official military, the elderly volunteer unit, Steppe Wolves, comprising mostly 60-plus-year-olds, aids the Ukrainian troops by operating makeshift rocket launchers using repaired munitions and enemy weapons. And I think this is absolutely brilliant. Get older volunteers. You can talk about people who might be you don't want whole units full of people who are marginalized in society, but you can, there are places for people who might otherwise not have a job or things to do, and unemployed, for example. Rather than being unemployed and on welfare, your welfare is being a member of a unit. Yeah, you might not be in the front line, so don't worry about that, but you can be helping the military in many ways. I think, and I'm sure they are doing stuff like this, but that I think there needs to be a real formal push to get all sorts of people helping across that societal spectrum, helping with the war effort. In all the different ways you can think of. Poland has proposed establishing a European heavy brigade of troops, so this is going back to the thinking of a European army, to quickly respond to events in regions neighbouring the EU without US participation, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski has said. Quote, events in the Balkans or North Africa are examples of situations in which Europe should not turn to the United States. Interesting to see this move away from dependency on the US. Now, as I've said before, there are many in the US who would like that kind of Trumpian isolationism, which is, yep, you should be sorting out your own problems, standing on your own 2 feet. You don't need the US to sort out your problems. But then there are many Americans who say, actually, they are our problems, because if we want to sit at the top of the global hegemony, we need to be investing in foreign affairs in order that we are the supreme power in the world, so that we can have the dollar as the international trade currency, so that we can have a diplomatic soft power around the world, so we can therefore leverage our soft power in terms of getting trade deals, and that eventually has economic benefit for the US. And unfortunately, isolationism doesn't have that kind of benefit. So if you want to recede from the globe, you will lose power and lose economic benefit. It's a return on investment you get. And we're going to return to this idea in a minute. Okay, so the GUR's military intelligence for Ukraine has assessed that the Russian missile production and stockpiles are 40 Zircon in service. So these are this newish sort of missile that we have seen, and up to 10 produced a month. 400 Onyx or Onyx M, those are anti-ship missiles, 400 of those and 10 produced a month. 270 Caliber, which isn't that many considering that's your bog standard cruise missile, but 30 to 40 produced a month. They have not been firing them from the Black Sea recently, although they just did the other day for the first time in a long time out of 2 submarines, I believe. But they are producing more of those, but actually don't have as many because they use a lot more of those. 45 KH-65, and they produce 1 to 3 of those per month. So that's just an interesting little snippet of their production numbers there. Right. As a finish to this video, I just want to respond to a comment from a commenter called David Hess to my video the other day. So I think this is interesting. It is to do with military aid and whatnot, but a few criticisms here. Just by the way, and thank you to David Hess for putting this together, but he gets a little bit annoyed that I haven't read the previous one that he wrote. Just to remind people, I'm on my own. People message me both off YouTube, through Twitter and through Discord. I have just umpteen things to do on a daily basis, and I try and read as many YouTube. I don't know any other YouTuber that reads as many comments as I do. And if I don't get to your comment or read them, don't have a go at me. Like, I'm just one human being that works on this all day, so I try my best. Anyway, I'm an American Reagan Republican Christian. I did not vote for Trump either time. Huge supporter of Ukraine, and believe the USA should provide more support to Ukraine regardless of what any other country does. I don't want to live in an authoritarian world. So absolutely, as he said, we're on the same side, but some of your comments drive me crazy. So point 1, you say that Europe has now provided more support for Ukraine than the USA. This is 100% true. You showed a chart a couple of days ago, so that's from the Kiel Institute, that showed defense spending as a percentage of GDP for European countries. The chart showed 2014 versus today. 2014 chart said it all to me, but you didn't say anything about that. In general, Europe has woefully underinvested in defense for decades. Defense spending is like insurance, and I totally agree with this. It is like insurance. You don't appreciate it until you are in an accident. The USA has spent heavily on defense since World War II. Now Russia has invaded Ukraine, the accident. Europe now wants to buy insurance after the accident has happened, and also wants the USA to use their insurance to help pay for it. I have a problem with that. So on the one hand, he's correct. There's been an underspending on defense, and it is an insurance policy. By the way, lots of people get NATO wrong. They think NATO is an I think this is what is kind of underwriting Trump's getting the whole NATO thing. We need to equalize payment because it's unfair. We paid this. What America's done is pay for their own defense. The criteria is spending on your own defense. You're not spending on NATO. NATO isn't this massive thing. Yeah, there are expenses from NATO for the kind of coordination and stuff, and doing NATO exercises together. That will have an expense. But the paying, scare quotes, for NATO is not paying for NATO. It's paying for your own defense. So when Trump says you need to equalize more, it's completely unfair. It's not like the US has paid for a thing out there and ended up paying 90% for a thing where it's supposed to be shared, and you guys are only paying 10% for this thing, like this widget, right? And that's unfair. It's not like that. It's like you need to spend on yourselves defense. And actually, the best way to see it is in terms of insurance, like David Hess says here. But don't think that it's unfair because we paid more for this thing than you've paid for this thing. It's not what David Hess is saying, but it's what a lot of people do, I think, intuitively believe. It's not. It's just spend more on yourselves so that when we do get into a problem of there being a war, you're not over-reliant on in this case, the US, which is what has happened. Now, the US has realized this and is spending now more. And so that is what's been equalized. So I don't agree with this. Europe now wants to buy insurance after the accident, so that's correct, has happened. Also wants the USA to use their insurance to pay for it. Yes, they do want that because that's what the US wants as well, and that's what NATO is. That's the rationale of NATO. And the thing about the US in NATO, or about their own expenditure, is the US spend more than the next 10 countries combined. So this is 2022 stats. They spent $877 billion. They just spend phenomenal amounts. And the difference between Europe or basically the rest of the world and the US is that the US has a defense budget that is strategically part of their whole economic strategy, right? So when they are doing economics, they are necessarily thinking about how much they're spending on defense, because that then feeds into manufacturing, jobs, um, their foreign diplomacy, and all the kind of foreign international relations strategizing as well. But it is also to do with how they do their economics. And for the rest of the world, that's simply not the case anymore. Now, you can argue we need to spend more, and we are realizing that we need to spend more. But the US needing to spend, not having done anything for 7 months is a problem for Ukraine, but it's a problem for the US, because supporting Ukraine is massively in the US's interests. This is not just about this being a European thing and Europeans wanting the US to do it because we want you to solve our problems. The idea is you need to spend more, you need to get those aid packages in to help Ukraine because it's in your best interest to do so, and our best interest. We are not asking the US to solve our problems. We are asking the US to solve our problems. So it's not a European problem, it's a global problem, or it's a kind of Western allied NATO problem. And since you are not only in the best position to do so in terms of your technological advancement of weapons, but it's your sheer scale of the stockpiles you guys have got, which you have because it's part and parcel of your economic strategy. So I would take issue with that. The US has spent heavily on defense since World War II. Yep. Now Russia has invaded Ukraine. Europe wants to buy insurance after the accidents happen, and also wants the USA to use their insurance to help pay for it. Yes. I believe that if Europe had seriously invested in defense over the past 2 decades, that Russia would not have done the invasion. I actually disagree with that. I think Russia would have done the invasion, wasn't expecting everyone to, because actually they weren't expecting the Ukrainians. So I fully disagree with that. And especially when you look at what happened in 2014 and how that evolved, and how they annexed Crimea. They weren't really planning on annexing Crimea. It was a bit of a last minute decision. It has very little to do with NATO encroachment. It's really interesting. Read Owen Matthews' Overreach, which I'm in the middle of reading at the moment, and there's some really good references on how it was actually nothing to do with NATO encroachment. That was a much later post hoc rationalization to why Russia supposedly invaded Ukraine, but it was nothing to do with 2014, and it was nothing to do with how well militarily equipped Europe were or are, both in 2014 and 2022. It was just a complete miscalculation on, I think, what would happen in Ukraine, certainly in 2022. I don't think it took a whole lot of knowledge, says David, to realise that Putin and the Russian government were the bad guys over the last 20 years. Absolutely true. And we should have, hindsight's 2020, of course. I've said previously that I don't blame Angela Merkel for trying to do with Putin what she did. It didn't work. As a result of it not working, I think we should have started spending more on our military. So I do sort of agree with David there, but also completely disagree with the way some of that is framed. Point 2, you have said, I am not criticizing USA, but at least 50 to 100 times. The reason why I say it is because actually your idea of what I think is completely wrong here. So that's why I have to say it. I believe you do not like the USA. Absolute nonsense. And I don't have any issue with that. You're entitled to like or dislike anything or anyone you want. I'm not a USA as a best person. We make a lot of mistakes as a country and should always strive to improve. I agree. But I don't agree that I don't like the USA. I believe we should judge things on the whole and believe the entire world is better with the USA in it than not. Yeah, I think you should just be honest and own it. If you don't like America, we can still be friends. And I want to massively push back on that because it's not true. What I don't like are politicians in America who are fundamentally at odds with my sense of morality, right? And what then happens is I criticize people like Donald Trump, right? Or people in the Republican Party, because that's not my political inclination. And it means that if you are from the Republican Party, then it feels like I am criticizing America to you, but I'm not. I'm criticizing certain people. What you've failed to pick up on is when I absolutely sing the praises of certain Americans. Now, like if you look at my writing over time, if you look at my videos over time, I don't spend an awful lot of time doing it here because I know it will be divisive. But I absolutely think someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are full of integrity, brilliant politicians, and are morally absolutely on point. So if you want to go and see a video, for example, now that I think is an American politician being amazing, this Young Turks video of her in a hearing just now, AOC delivers a brilliant response to Chip Roy. She is so eloquent and so knowledgeable and so morally on point with regard to this. It's nothing to do with the Ukraine war. It's actually to do with cobalt mining and Chinese influence in American industry. She's absolutely insanely on point and brilliant. And everything she says here is just, I'm in awe of her. I'm often in awe of her. And she gets absolutely lambasted by the right. But when I sing the praises of AOC or Bernie Sanders, someone like David Hess doesn't think, oh, he loves America. But when I slag off politicians in America, it's he hates America. So what's wrong here is that I love politicians who say the right things and I hate politicians who say the wrong things. Trump and some in the Republican Party, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, incur great wrath in me, like evoke great wrath in me. And that may look to some like I hate America. It's not. I hate certain people who happen to be American, who are politicians in the country that's the most important country on earth to get it right because of the influence America has, the US has. And so, yeah, that point 2, I fundamentally disagree with. Point 3, you reference an article on Trump today. Trump said that USA is an ocean away from this conflict. You called him a muppet. Must be a British thing because I really don't know what that means. An idiot. In an earlier video, you mentioned Spain's low level of support because they are on the west end of Europe and far away from the conflict. How come it's a valid reason for Spain, which is on the same continent, but not a valid reason when it's an ocean away? It seems like a double standard to me. Yeah, it does seem like a double standard maybe, but it's completely not. Spain is not the top of the hegemonic ladder. Spain is not investing it all around the world in foreign diplomatic interventions. Spain is not, at least not for the last 600 years. They used to do that, but not anymore. Spain is not comparable to Spain wasn't the main adversary of Russia in the Cold War. The US was. The US does all those things. So when they may be an ocean away, but actually, it depends if you go across the Bering Straits, they're not an ocean away. They may be an ocean away going eastwards from the US, but and Spain may be closer, but Spain has not as much of a horse in the race as the US does with regard to Ukraine. It's as simple as that. So that's what would be called a false equivalence or a false analogy. Yeah. You always analyse the USA support for Ukraine deeply and say a lot of things, but never do that on Europe's support. Examples: it is a money multiplier that stimulates the US economy. It's going to USA firms to make the weapons. Who else can make the Abrams tanker, Patriot launcher, Bradley F-16s, etc.? Should we have Brazil make them? Last time I checked, they didn't have the production lines and expertise. I get your point. The only other country with the industrial capacity to build as much equipment is China. I hope you don't think this is a good idea. You also mentioned how much Europe spends on Ukrainian refugees and humanitarian support, which is great. However, you downplay how much money the USA is going to Ukraine. This seems like another double standard to me. I don't really understand the point here. I support the economic argument for both the EU, and I think our industrial capacity needs to massively ramp up, and it will be for the benefit of the EU, not only in terms of energy security independence, but also in terms of economic independence from the US, and etc., etc. So I'm not sure of that point particularly. You make comments about economics, which come straight out the far left handbook. The handbook always wants to spend other people's money. The problem is that sooner or later you run out of money. Your talk is about how the USA military spending is a money multiplier and stimulates the economy. This is 100% true. The part you leave out is a temporary effect or sugar rush. This is not sustainable in the long run. You can't just make bombs and then blow them up. Yep, this is a problem with the Russian economy and how the war footing is. But the difference is that the US has the massive stockpiles it does, and has a long-term sustainable economy, I think largely built, or not largely built, but a very important component of that, with $877 billion being spent on the US defense budget, it has that sustainably built into the US economic strategy. And so it is slightly different than just ramping up, blowing stuff up, and then not having a war. And especially when the US is at the top of that hegemonic ladder and gets involved around the world, then actually they need to make sure they have the best stuff and enough stuff if that is their foreign diplomatic strategy. If you want to go full on isolationist, fair enough, but you're going to have to sack half of your armed forces. So you either do one or the other, and I think this is still in the best interest for the US. I am arguing not spending the US's money, not the Europe spending US's money. That's not what I'm coming from. Like, you misinterpret me, and it goes back to the previous point. I am trying to advocate for, if I was American, I would be arguing the same thing, because it's in America's best interest to do this. If the US had no horse in this race, if the Cold War never happened, if the US was nothing to do with Russia and the US wasn't the top of the hegemonic ladder in the world, then I would not be making these same arguments. You can imagine I am American and I would be making the same arguments. So again, I disagree with this point. This is all good stuff, by the way. I'm not getting angry with David here, by the way. I am defending myself. If you're going to talk USA economics, then give them a full picture. If we continue down a far left economics policy, I don't know what I'm advocating spending on the military-industrial complex and integrating that with your foreign diplomatic strategy. I don't know how this is far left economic policy. Anyway, then we'll end up with the Argentina-style issues. Well, okay. Point 5, you seem to, which is I think point 6 now, you seem to a little too flippant about the possibility of nuclear war. I believe the very slow and measured escalation of the countries that support Ukraine is the right path. All it takes is one small miscalculation and nuclear war could start. Please read about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how misjudgments nearly started a nuclear war. I get that, and I think you've miscalculated what my view on nuclear war is, and I'm not flippant about it. I think it's unlikely. However, by the way, David, although you sound like a Reagan Republican, that is indeed the Biden administration's complete strategy with regard to this war. That is, which is interesting, because I doubt you'd be advocating the Biden strategy and the Jake Sullivan strategy, but they are absolutely beholden to the nuclear war issue and a small miscalculation leading to a nuclear war. So I get that. That's an interesting discussion to have, by the way, but it is interesting that if you're going to criticize me for being too flippant with that, then you are advocating a Jake Sullivan approach, it appears to me. Point 6, you have said on multiple occasions that things are done for reasons. Leaders don't just have rabbits running around in their heads. Yep, I agree with that. You have put down Elon Musk many times and basically portrayed him as after money or evil. I've followed Elon for years and truly believe that money is not what drives him. No, it's not, actually, and I agree with you. I don't think it primarily drives him, but I think it's the means to an end. So if there's lots of personal things going on and being the greatest and being the savior, which comes out in his book, by all accounts, he wants to be the savior, blah, blah, blah. And if Tesla and SpaceX are the way to do that, then Tesla and SpaceX need to succeed and be in the positions they are in, which means that it is about the raw natural resources that allow them to be the big economic successes that they are. So one is actually a means to the other end. The money isn't the end, it's the means. And I think it's really important to understand. It's okay to disagree with me. I did wonder why he had certain thoughts about Russia and Ukraine. I happened to watch the interview Don Lemon had with Elon, and this question was asked. I don't agree with his reasoning, but now I understand his reasoning, and it's very interesting. I won't go into it, but please watch it. I have seen it if you haven't already. After watching it, I don't believe he is a paid-up Russian agent. No, but he exists in that information space, and it poisons his thinking in really insidious ways, and that's a problem. And if you are going to amplify the voice of someone like David Saxon, then it's not cool. He's not looking at the conflict from a 0 to 50 year time frame, but 1,000+ year time frame. Not the place to go into that. But thank you so much for that thoughtful comment. And I have dealt with that at least to some degree here and now, because actually it's relevant to military aid and the US's position on that. And the TLDR of it is that this is all in the US's best interest, and that's why the US needs to pay. I would argue possibly even more than many European nations by quite a long shot, because compare, again, Spain to the US in terms of size of the country, in terms of foreign policy, and in terms of the history of the Cold War and the history of Russia. So I think this is all in US's best interest, and that's why aid packages forthcoming from the US are really good for Ukraine, but also good for the US. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon.